As is tradition, there's a new Darkest Dungeon patch, which means that I am burning the midnight oil to give you all the ins and outs of the latest changes. The new patch is Suffer No Sin, and the patch number is 0.19.43728, and we're going to talk all about it. The headline feature for this patch is the arrival of a new playable hero class, the Vestal. Here's what Red Hook has to say about it. The Vestal brings a potent mix of defensive support options and flexibility. Her divine consecrations allow her to bless ranks in combat, empowering allies who occupy them. This update allows players to unlock and upgrade the Vestal at the Altar of Hope, visit the Shrine of Reflection to experience her origin story told in 5 chapters, including playable flashback encounters. Basically, what that tells you is that the Vestal is a full-fledged hero, unlike the Bounty Hunter. So you'll be going to hero shrines, you'll be unlocking her skills, you'll start with a subset of those skills. In this video, we're going to cover all of the skills, so if you're not interested in spoiling yourselves on those, I'll put a little spoiler warning for the portions that you need to avoid. But before we can talk about the Vestal's mechanics, we need to talk about some new tokens that have been added specifically for the Vestal. The first of those is Conviction. Conviction is like the Vestal's version of Unchecked Power. It doesn't come with the negative of lighting her on fire, but it does empower her abilities a lot like the Occultist's Unchecked Power. Beyond that, the Vestal has 2 blessings that she can bestow on a friendly rank, in combat. There is Consecration of Light and Consecration of Fortitude. Respectively, these are an offensive and defensive buff that she places on a specific location on the battlefield, and then whatever hero is inhabiting that location at the start of their turn will receive a benefit. Consecration of Light is going to be giving strength, and when upgraded, it will have a chance of giving a crit token, and Consecration of Fortitude is always going to be giving either a block or dodge token, and the improved version is going to be giving improved dodge and improved block. Now on to the Vestal's skills. The first skill in her arsenal is Hand of Light, which is a reasonably light hit, 2 to 3 damage, that gives her a strength and a block token. When it's upgraded, it also gives a random hero a block token. In my experience, it's a pretty weak ability, having played with it just a little bit. Illumination is going to be removing dodge and stealth, and the upgraded version will also prevent future dodge from being added. Again, this is one of those skills that I think is low tempo. I don't expect we're going to use it again. Judgment seems like the back rank Vestal's bread and butter skill. It's a medium damage attack that consumes those worship tokens, those conviction tokens that we were talking about previously. And at the higher levels of conviction, you initially get more damage, and then you get burn, which was a theory that I saw floating around, that the Vestal would bring burn to a second character. The upgraded version is going to give you more damage and more burn. Interestingly, all of her abilities seem very low crit. The next ability is Divine Grace, which is your first heal that you get with the Vestal. It has a target HP threshold of 25% and a 2-turn cooldown, which is a little punishing, feels a little difficult to work around. And the conviction tokens are going to increase the amount that is healed by a percentage. So it looks like at 3 conviction tokens, you're going to be getting a 45% heal, or the upgraded version is going to be a 50% heal that you can use at as high as 33%. That's a pretty big upgrade. I think Divine Grace is going to become one of the new best heals, especially because there was a nerf to Indiscriminate Science that we'll talk about in a little bit. The next skill is Consecration of Fortitude. This goes back to those tokens that we were talking about before, and following the standard consecration concept, you place down the consecration and it is either the baseline or the improved version. So let's say you put this on the slot where your tank is. Every turn at the start of your tank's turn, so when your tank comes up in the turn order, they're either going to get a dodge or block token, either base level or improved. One thing that I think is very interesting that I noticed in my testing is that Consecration seems to have a maximum number of uses that can be taken, because if you're playing a shuffle comp, you can have multiple people in a particular rank in a particular turn. So I was actually able to use up the Consecration before the cooldown came up and I could play it again. I think there's some ways that we might be able to utilize that to our advantage, but just useful to know about. Next up on the list is Ministrations. It has a 1-turn cooldown, and it is your dot, daze, and stun removal. There's some changes to daze and stun that I think are going to be very interesting. We'll talk about in a minute. And in this case, the upgraded version is going to give you resists to that particular type if you use this and cure that type. So if someone's burning, you cure burn, you're going to have 30% more burn resist. I think this is a sleeper pretty darn good skill because there are very few fights that apply a particular debuff and then go and apply a different one. So this is going to be pretty tailored. If you're fighting enemies that bleed you, this will be really useful because it will also buff your tank's bleed, as an example. Next up is Mace Bash. This is the Vestal's tanky / hard hitting ability. What is interesting about it from my perspective is really the 2 conviction improvement that makes it ignore block, dodge, and guard. The reason that this is interesting is, again, because of a change that we'll be talking about in a little bit, but now when you ignore those tokens, you are also going to be stripping those tokens. So ignore block is significantly more valuable than it used to be. And then the double damage on this one means that the Vestal is going to be hitting pretty hard if they get all the way up to 3 conviction. But as we're going to talk about at a later point, or maybe in a future video, it's hard. It seems very hard to get 3 conviction. And then I think there are more impactful places to be spending it. The next skill that you have is Sanctuary. This is the Vestal acting as a tank. The thing that is particularly interesting about this is the upgrade, where you can now also have a 2-stress heal on it. That makes the Vestal a bit of a jack of all trades in a way that we haven't really seen since the early days of the Plague Doctor. But I think this one is interesting, and there's a path that synergizes with Sanctuary, where when you get hit, you will potentially be generating conviction. So that might be the high conviction play, and a Mace Bash Sanctuary tank might be effective. Next, we have Consecration of Light, which is just like Consecration of Fortitude, but this time it's the offensive one. You put this on a slot where your Highwayman or your Grave Robber or some other damage-dealing class is going to be, and at the start of their turn, they will be getting a Strength token, and then the upgraded version will have a 25% chance to get them a Crit token. Interestingly, the last 2 skills in the unlock order are the ones that really make the Vestal's healing capacity sing. The first of them is Divine Comfort, which is on a very long cooldown, but it can be used from rank 2, which I think is pretty big, and gives 3 regen with no limitations. So you can put this on someone you're expecting to take a big hit early on, and then it will just top them up over time. Regen is a very powerful ability because it has the capacity to take someone off of death's door when their turn starts. And if you have less dots on you than the amount of regen you have, it also has the capacity to prevent you from hitting a death's door check. And then last, but certainly not least, is Mantra. Usable from the back 2 ranks, it is a target heal 10% if the person is standing on a consecration. So we've talked about the 2 consecrations, Light and Fortitude, but if you're dropping those, especially Fortitude, I can see Mantra being insanely useful because of the fact that it has no health requirement. Much like Divine Comfort, the Vestal is now the only healer in the game that can heal someone who you are anticipating will take damage as opposed to having already taken damage. So very interesting skill in Mantra and Divine Comfort, but overall the Vestal skill set looks pretty interesting and pretty strong. I think primarily we're going to see them played as a 4th rank backliner who's kicking out some heals and doing a bit of buffing and occasionally tossing a judgment to take down a low health enemy. Moving on to paths, the Vestal has 3 paths: the Confessor, the Chaplain, and the Seraph. And honestly, these threw me for a loop because Darkest Dungeon has slightly changed the way that they present paths. So now when you have a path, it will tell you a overview of what the path does and then which of the skills are changed, but not the ways in which they're changed anymore. I think this is to prepare for more complex modifications and paths in the future. But to go through the specifics of each of these paths, first we have the Confessor. And the Confessor is all about debuffing as part of your attacks, it seems. So the affected skills are Hand of Light, Illumination, Judgment, and Mantra. So Hand of Light is going to give Weaken to the target. Illumination is now going to be stripping positive tokens, which I think is a very interesting one because Illumination already ignores dodge. So having it ignore dodge and strip potentially dodge and other tokens seems very strong. Then Judgment is going to replace the fire dot that you normally get for your stacks of conviction with weaken and vulnerable stacks respectively, and the upgraded version will double those up. And then last but not least, Mantra is going to remain the same in terms of its healing capacity, but at maximum conviction will remove all negative tokens only, which is very interesting because that makes it the only skill in the game that can strip all negative tokens and not get the positive ones like Indiscriminate Science does. So overall, I see the Confessor as remaining that kind of backline support type character, but weaving in a little more offensive capability and a little more offensive support, stripping tokens, etc. The next path is the Chaplain, and the Chaplain modifies Hand of Light, Mantra, and Sanctuary, and improves the Vestal's stun and move resist. It also has one other major change, which is Conviction is no longer generated once per turn, but instead generated when the Vestal is hit. With this path, we'll see Hand of Light changing so that it does a little less damage, but other than that, I believe it remains unmodified. Sanctuary, on the other hand, is going to be improved to give 1 improved block and 1 regular block in the upgraded version, and 3 guard tokens rather than 2. And then Mantra is going to be changed so that it can be used from any rank, but requires the target to be actively guarded when you use it. And then if you use it, the heal now comes with a stress heal for the target and a stress heal for self that do not appear to be limited by the amount of stress that you have. So that's pretty interesting, but there's a lot of moving parts that you need to get working there in order to be able to do that. Pairing the Vestal up with a Man-at-Arms might make that a little bit easier. But overall, the Chaplain path seems to be kind of like the tank spec. So you might very well play them in the front rank, or you might play them as a backline support using Sanctuary pretty frequently to try and build up conviction to get those big Mantra plays. It'll be interesting to see if that's enough stress healing to kind of carry a party through. I am a little skeptical about it. The third and final path is the Seraph path. And with the Seraph path, you gain your conviction when consecrations activate. And then consecrations last 5 rounds. So this is your buffing spec as far as I can tell. It took me a minute to figure out the ways in which it changed Fortitude and Light, but it increases the cooldown of both of them by 2 turns. So now they are 5-turn cooldowns, and it'll be interesting to see if that dynamic that I was describing where consecrations last 5 rounds or 5 activations is true. But then it comes with the additional wrinkle that with this path, when you use Mantra, you'll be able to strip all consecrations on the target and immediately heal without the need for conviction. So this path seems like it does away with the need for conviction to use Mantra effectively, and instead you just have to have a consecration in play, either Light or Fortitude. So this almost seems like kind of a dedicated healer if I'm looking at it. But those are the 3 paths. They seem pretty interesting and diverse, but I'm going to need to play with them to get a better handle on how exactly they work. Last but certainly not least are the 3 Vestal trinkets that are unlocked in the Altar of Hope. The first is the Icon of Light, which is if your Vestal is in rank 4, your regen is increased by 2, which is very huge. All by itself, that's insane, given the fact that you have that big regen coming from, I'll get the names down eventually, Divine Comfort. And then target blessing skills remove 1 stress is also big, right? That means that you place down Blessing of Fortitude on your tank and you also get 1 stress heal that is not limited. So I think that's pretty strong. And then melee skills getting a reduction in damage isn't a big deal because, among other things, Judgment, which I think is the bread and butter backliner skill, is a ranged attack, not a melee attack. Next trinket is the Profane Scroll. This is your tank trinket from the looks of it. So rank 1, you're going to be getting more max HP. Rank 2, you're going to be getting more damage. And you're going to have the ability to generate taunt with Hand of Light. That makes the Vestal a passable tank, I would say, but it's a little awkward. And then if you end up in the back, you're going to end up with a bunch of stress mounting very quickly. And then last but not least, you have your Smoldering Firewood, which is kind of like your Arsonist trinket. The first thing that I find strange about it is Smoldering Firewood really sounds like it should be flammable itself, but if you have a flammable item equipped, you do 25% more damage, and then the Illumination skill is going to inflict a burn, which I think is useful, but I'm not sure this is particularly great. I think you'll probably want to use Judgment with the increase of 25% damage most of the time, and then 15% of the time you'll get lit on fire when you get hit. Last but certainly not least, the Vestal's trademark item is the Holy Hymnal, which is going to give 25% max HP to anyone standing in a consecration. Pretty straightforward. I think this one's actually quite strong because it's another source of increasing HP for your tanks. And I think Consecration of Fortitude is going to be the big winner in terms of consecrations. So that's the Vestal. Now we're going to talk about the rest of the changes. I've edited this list down. Let me know if that's something you like or don't like. I decided not to talk about some of the things that are like UI improvement here or that, and really only focus on the important changes since there was a lot of Vestal stuff to talk about anyways. But all these hero changes I do think are important. The first is that the Man-at-Arms Strategic Withdrawal heal now resolves after Riposte and Hateful Backstab damage, consistent with the heal timing on Crush. This is a slight hit to the Man-at-Arms' survivability because Strategic Withdrawal was a reasonably large hit that you could say use on an Exemplar and then eat a Riposte after. Now the Riposte will come in first, which means your Man-at-Arms might die before that heal. Next up, we have a buff to the Leper. When using combo to ignore blind, the Leper will now also remove one of his blind tokens on a successful hit. This is so nice because the problem that the Leper often had was that initially you'd have a great setup in a semi-shuffle comp for placing down a combo. You'd get a few hits in, you'd run out of combo generation, and in the meantime, your Leper wasn't removing their existing blind tokens and was stacking up new blind tokens. They just had a mountain of blind tokens. The Runaway will no longer consume crit tokens with Hearthlight. Seems like a good one. And the Plague Doctor's Indiscriminate Science is now slightly more discriminant. Negative token healing bonus reduced to 5% from 10%. Indiscriminate Science was one of the best heals in the game, and I think they're trying to push the Plague Doctor away from being the bee's knees healer and make some space for the Vestal, who now I think is going to be the stronger healer. I think Indiscriminate Science is still really good. Being able to remove negative tokens is enough as a general rule of thumb. I think one thing that they should probably do to balance this out is, now that they've reduced the healing, maybe think about relaxing the threshold so you can use it just to remove tokens if you want to, perhaps. There was an update to the Highwayman's first flashback. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but basically they changed it slightly, and it sounds like it's going to be similarly straightforward. I don't see it becoming much more difficult. On to the combat changes, I should say. So first of all, and this was a community suggestion, and I am so excited about this. We already talked about it a little bit, but damaging skills that natively ignore block, dodge, or guard, like pick to the face, will now remove one of those tokens on a successful hit. Now, it says one of those tokens, so I'm curious exactly how it works, but I assume it just means that if it ignores block, it'll remove one block token when you hit. This is such a huge buff for skills like pick to the face, and it's a big buff to the grave robber in general, I think. But more broadly, anyone who is ignoring block, dodge, and guard is now going to be stripping them. So think about the Hellions Howling End. The fact that you're now going to hit into a block token, ignore that block token, and remove it is going to make fights like the Implication a lot more straightforward. The next one is a big change. Adjustments to daze and stun. Dazing a target who is already dazed will now convert it to a stun. Daze and stun cannot coexist in the same target. Stun will always take priority. These rules apply evenly to monsters and heroes alike. This is very cool. This means that daze skills are now much more interesting. One of the skills that springs to mind for me immediately is blinding gas on the Plague Doctor. If you have a Jester with Encore and blinding gas on the Plague Doctor, I think there's a cooldown on blinding gas, but I think there may be some interesting interplay there where you may be able to come up with two heroes that have the ability to daze, and you may be able to successfully get a stun early, which is very cool. And then Controlled Burn / Controlled Burn Plus have unique token icons moving forward. Next up, there are 6 new items that have been added to the game. I have only been able to see 4 of them. They are the Makeshift Javelin, Wilbur's Flask, the Bone Mallet, the Pig Sticker, the Locked Strongbox, and the Spacious Strongbox. The latter 2 of which I have not been able to find the details on. But let's talk about the first 4. So Wilbur's Flag is a back rank combat item that marks a front rank unit with combo and vulnerable. I think there are some cases where this could be pretty darn useful, but the fact that it only stacks once means that it's kind of difficult. I also noticed that it says 2 targets on it, so I think it might target both of the front ranks and give them combo and vulnerable, which would be a bit stronger. And then I would say it's a pretty decent combat item. I have a guess as to where we're going to find it. And then secondly, we have the Makeshift Javelin, which is a single target, knockback 3, root in place, 10% crit, and 3 to 6 damage. I think this is going to be a nice surprise little bump of damage, and also will be pretty useful for some of those enemies that are weakened when they're in the back ranks. Think like sending a cultist way, way, way far to the back, moving some cherubs or a flesh bagpipe forward. Then for trinkets, we have the Bone Mallet, which is apply on crit if flame is less than 40, another reason to be rolling Infernal anytime you can. Daze, if target has stun plus 50% damage. So this is one of those ones where if you have solid crit, I could see this being very powerful for generating a lot of daze and also, by extension, a lot of stun. I'm thinking this would be great on the Highwayman. This would be great on the Grave Robber. Secondly, we have the Pig Sticker, which is gain on crit if flame less than 40%, a stealth token if target has combo plus 10% crit. This is built for the Grave Robber. So specifically the Grave Robber paths that benefit from stealth and increased crit and some of the other increased crit tokens, trinkets. I think this is going to be really good for generating and staying in stealth and doing lots of crits in the process. I'm very excited to try and make some builds work with Pig Sticker. Onto the UI, Horror has a more horrific icon. And then updated the stress halos and stress crown visuals. They look pretty sick, I will say. They're much more kind of like ephemeral, like pop up and disappear type of thing. Really dig them. For item changes, there's some tooltip improvements as always. The strongbox now helps you stack baubles as well. That makes the strongbox probably one of the best stagecoach equipments that you can possibly get, because it used to just work for relics and I would grab it all the time anyways. And now working for baubles too is going to free up so much space. The jumbo storage trunk is no more. Now it is the spacious storage trunk. Harder to say, I will say. The reward tokens from creature dens have now had their type changed to deliverable instead of currency. I expect that this is probably in anticipation of at some point adding another deliverable, maybe from that wandering boss that's coming in a future update. Linseed oil was too powerful, so now the chance to daze has gone from 50 to 20%. This is likely because of the changes to daze. Daze is really good now, because if you have a target that's already dazed, linseed oil allows you to stun them. So moving that down to 20% is fine. The fact that it still stacks to 4 will make it still really good at taking out the general. Rousing Ringer reduced chance for daze from 66 to 33. Same reason, I suspect. It's because of the changes to daze. And then Stiff Drink, chance to convert speed to daze reduced from 80 to 20. This one, I'm not so sure I get entirely. I think removing daze through this trinket wasn't that big a deal, and the 80% already gave me some pause, so now 20% means that when I look at Stiff Drink, I will not consider this as part of its value. And then Curing Cuppa now has the Noxious tag. Last but not least, on the miscellaneous front, Off Guard region modifier is now called Devious Plans, has a better name, and Off Guard was already a quirk. And then some of the more difficult hero goals have been removed from the game. There's a long list of fixes. You will be able to find a link in the video description that has the full patch notes if you're really interested, but there's lots of things in here that aren't particularly interesting. The one that I wanted to highlight is one that has been plaguing us for a while, which is fixed an issue where heal previews would incorrectly multiply on mouse over. So there was that weird thing where it would be like, look, you're going to heal for 100, and then all of a sudden you wouldn't. But me taking a deep breath, that is the new update to the Darkest Dungeon. Suffer, what is it even called? I'm scrolling back looking for it. There it is. Suffer No Sins is the latest update. The Vestal is here, and if you're watching this shortly after it goes live, I am probably live playing some Darkest Dungeon and would love to have you there. But other than that, if this guide was useful, toss me a like, and if you want to see more guides like this as I put them out, toss me a subscription so they show up in your subscription box. But for now, that's it for me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.